price elasticity of demand determinants would lead you to believe that demand for the housing market should be very inelastic. And he's asking, why isn't it very inelastic? So let's go through each of the price elasticity of demand determinants, one by one, so that everybody can just review them. Go ahead, Dayton.
Price elasticity rises if there are close substitutes.
Are there close substitutes for the housing market?
No.
When we talk about the housing market, what are we talking about? We're talking about houses, actual houses to purchase, to own. We're not talking about rental houses. We're not talking about apartments. We're not talking about mobile homes. So there are close substitutes. Not everybody has to own a home. There are plenty of other places to live. Next.
Price elasticity is higher for narrowly defined products.
Is housing market narrowly defined? No, because there are other places. Okay?
Price elasticity is higher for luxuries than for necessities.
Is housing a luxury or a necessity? It is in some form or another a necessity. You need shelter. Okay?
Price elasticity is higher in long-term than short-term.
Long-term or short-term. So if you have time to save up to purchase a house, your demand is going to be more or less elastic?
Less.
More. Long-term is more elastic. Short-term is less elastic. But in the short term, so your house burns down tonight. Okay? Your parents are paying a mortgage, they're purchasing their house. It burns down tonight. Can you find somewhere to sleep tomorrow in the short run? Yeah. Well, even if you didn't have insurance, you can rent an apartment, you can stay in a long stay motel, you can stay in a hotel overnight, you can sleep in somebody's basement, the Red Cross will help you out, whatever the case. So in long term, more elastic. So where do we end up here, Dayton? The housing market is fairly elastic. The other reason that it's fairly elastic is because there are a wide range of prices available in the housing market. Even when prices go up, they're still less expensive and uber expensive, and there's a range in between. And in almost every community, there's a pretty good range. Good question. Does that help your understanding?
Yeah.
You don't sound convinced.
No.
Okay. All right. So we're on determinants of price elasticity of supply. Perfect elasticity looks exactly like it did for demand. Can you imagine if you had both the perfectly inelastic supply and perfectly inelastic demand curve? Won't happen. Won't happen because suppliers' motivations are completely different than consumers' motivations. Okay. For what? What kind of good would suppliers be willing to produce one quantity at any given price? This is kind of the inverse of perfect elasticity for consumption. What are they going to produce? Only one quantity. We're only producing this much. I don't care how much we can sell it for. We're only producing this much. Something where you can only make that much. It's that hard to make. What that is, I don't know. Because almost anything, you throw more money at it, you can have more of it. One of the examples that I got back when Mr. Burby taught me this class was the space shuttle. We only had one, because one had blown up. But Congress increased the budget, and then we had 4. So, I don't know a good example for this one, but I invite you to find one. Scott?
I was thinking maybe like a particle accelerator, because
Okay.
I don't know.
But if there were more money, we could build another one, right? And a particle accelerator isn't built by a firm.
Yeah, you're right.
So, I don't know. All right. What? Also not built by a firm. Okay. Inelasticity.
If you have more money, you can build the.
Here's something.
If you have the same money.
Here's something that is inelastic. It is more vertical than it is horizontal. Price sensitivity is fairly low. Elasticity is less than or greater than 1. To be inelastic, it has to be less than 1. Unit elastic. Perfect one-to-one slope, and the elasticity is 1. You are as reactive to the change in price as the price changes. Price goes up $1, you want 1 fewer. Or, I'm sorry, you will supply 1 more. Or it is a fixed ratio, depending upon what the scale of your axes is.
Did you say it's a 1-to-1 ratio?
It's a fixed ratio, depending upon what the what's the word for how far apart the things are on your axis? What's the word? The range of your axis. Thank you. Elastic, more horizontal than vertical. Elasticity will be greater than 1. Andrew, do you go home and print all these out or load them up on your computer to study them? Or do you just have, at this point, hundreds of econ photos clogging your phone?
Hundreds of emails about this content.
Like, why don't you just write it?
I'm eventually
You
going
could
to-
load them up into the Canvas group discussion.
Or don't you already have this on Canvas? Or on YouTube or whatever?
Well, it will be on YouTube when I'm done.
It kind of defeats the purpose to upload twice with traffic
It's
photos.
the what's your channel called? You right.
I don't know, there's a link to it. There's a link to this class's playlist on the Canvas, and then once you're there, you can figure out
Is he
the
just on
names.
home?
Huh?
Is he just on home?
Yeah, it's at the bottom of the page.
Okay.
Alright, and then perfect elasticity. I will produce any quantity you want at this price. Just like perfectly elastic demand, perfect elastic supply kind of doesn't really exist in the wild. It's a theoretical thing. Because what firm at a fixed price will produce an infinite quantity?
Unless you're limited by the government.
Unless what?
The government caps how much you can charge.
That's true, but you still wouldn't produce an unlimited quantity. Where you might see something similar to this would be, say, flu vaccines. The government contracts with pharmaceutical companies to produce the vaccine every year, and they say you got to produce at least this much. They can produce more. The government doesn't cap the price, but the government subsidizes to a certain level. But it's still not exactly perfect elasticity of supply. Okay. And we have an infinite elasticity. Okay, so we are through the first 2 kinds of elasticity. The next 2 are slightly more complex. But if you feel pretty good about these, you're going to be okay. If you still have not memorized these 5 types of elasticity of demand or supply determinants and where it's elastic or not, the less 1 greater than 1 thing, you need to get on that. Okay. So, the more easily you can change what you're producing, the greater the price elasticity of supply. So if I own an orchard, can I produce a whole lot more apples next year than I did last year? But how long does it take a tree to grow to be able to produce fruit? Can I produce a whole lot less? Well, no. Go cut them down, yeah, but then what have I done to myself for next year?
You just said Bruce Lee. What if you had a disease with your? Well,
That's an outside influence. That's not a choice I'm making. My trees get blight or something. Okay.
Don't pesticide your trees.
So our example here, there is only so much beachfront property in the world until ocean levels rise and then get more. But anyway, there's only so much oceanfront property in the world. This is pretty inelastic in terms of its supply. Okay? And I can't just make more beachfront property unless, of course, I'm Dubai and then I dredge up sand from the ocean bottom and create palm tree-like.
Hey, it's pretty
Oh,
dumb.
those
Yeah,
those
it
islands
is.
are
It is
sick.
pretty cool. But for the most part, beachfront property pretty perfectly inelastic. Okay. Now, how long do you have to change it? Let's go back to our apple orchard. If I have 10 years to change my supply is going to be more elastic. I can plant those seedlings, watch them grow, fertilize them, and they'll come to fruit-bearing age. I've got time. But if it's short run, no more apples. Can't do it. Okay. The same goes for wheat. The only wheat that's going to be harvested this fall is what was planted this spring. There's no insta-grow for wheat. Okay. So long run versus short run. Give me some time. I can turn more farmland into wheat growing farmland. I've got time to do that. I can plant more wheat. It's always a guessing game when it comes to that stuff. So the more long run time you have, the more elastic you're going to be. The shorter run, the less elastic you're going to be. Okay? Let's practice. Demand for both goods doubles. Okay? Thinking? Because everybody needs a car to get to their beachfront property. Right? So for which product will price change the most? I'm going to graph it for you real quickly since we're running out of time. Okay? So we know that for cars, what is our supply of cars? It's pretty elastic. So quantity went from there to there, but price only went from there to there. So quantity changed more because the supply is more elastic. Beachfront property, our demand increased by double, right? But there's only so many beaches in the world. Price goes up that much. The quantity. Okay. If you can graph it, you can read it. Always. If you can graph it, you can read it.
So the beachfront property makes more revenue.
Beachfront property is definitely going to make more revenue, yeah,
Yeah.
as demand increases. For sure. And then we've already answered for which one does quantity change the most.
So is this, is the inelasticity what will make it to where it won't be ambiguous?
Correct. Knowing how elastic one or the other is, but you still don't know. Here they told us demand doubled, but you may not always know how much demand or supply changes.
Are we eventually going to know how much that is?
So here's the graph for our beachfront property. Why they changed the angle of demand, I'm not sure, but we end up with the same net result there, right? Looks pretty close to what we did. And then here's our cars. Pretty close, right? All right. You know lots of things now. Make sure that you're getting your current events done over the week. I'll try during fourth hour to find time to get next week's current event up there so that you can get your extra credit done. Or for those of you who are due next week, you can get it done early over the weekend. Yes, sir.
Submitted something to you, probably to see like what you
You just go back into it.